All right, well, welcome. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature Organization, and I'd like to welcome you to the final day of the 2021 Iowa City Book Festival. Before we begin our program, I would like to take the opportunity to thank festival sponsors. The festival is supported by the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, and Iowa Public Radio. I also would like to thank the festival's partners, the Iowa City Public Library, who have been wonderful hosts to us all week. So for our session today, we have some luminaries of the Iowa poetry world. Debra Marquart is Iowa's Poet Laureate, and Shreya Khullar is Iowa's first Youth Poet Ambassador. Today they will read from their work and talk about their respective roles. Debra Marquart is a distinguished professor of liberal arts and sciences at Iowa State University. She teaches in the MFA program in creative writing and environment and serves as a senior editor of Flyaway, Journal of Writing and Environment. She's the author of 7 books, the most recent of which is The Night We Landed on the Moon, Essays Between Exile and Belonging. Her next poetry collection, Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars, New and Collected Poems, is forthcoming from New Rivers Press. Shreya Khullar is a student poet from here in Iowa City, where she attends West High School. She is an editor for Polyphony Lit, an international student-run magazine. Her poetry is inspired by her heritage, upbringing, and her favorite writers, including Haruki Murakami and Emily Dickinson. Her work is published or is forthcoming in the Rising Phoenix Press, Polyphony Lit, Hypernova Lit, and more. She also has been recognized by the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. She was sworn in as Iowa's inaugural Student Poet Ambassador this April. So welcome to the Book Festival, Deb and Shreya. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you for organizing this event. It's an honor to be part of the Iowa Book Festival event. I'm just kind of curious for the people who are on Zoom, are the cameras right there? Or?
Yeah, those cameras in the corners of the room there, and we've got someone aiming them at you, so you're
good.
fine.
So we'll be able to make some eye contact, right?
Yes.
Well, we thought that we would talk about poetry a little bit today, as well as read a few of our poems. And we're also open to any questions that might be coming through on Zoom if people are in the chat. John, do you have access to the chat?
Yes, I'll keep tabs on that.
We're just excited to be here. And so I just would like to start by asking Shreya, what have you been doing? What's it like to be the poetry ambassador? And we haven't caught up since April when you were inaugurated as our poet.
Yeah, of course. So over the summer, I did quite a few events. I read a YA novel called Patron Saints of Nothing, and then I interviewed Randy Ribai, who is the author of that book, so that was really interesting. And then there was also another book through the same program called Pie in the Sky that was a children's novel. I read that, interviewed the author Remy Lai from that, and those were 2 really fun events because I love reading, of course, and then talking about the books, especially with the authors. That was super fun. And then yeah, I did a lot of quite a few events over the summer, and then it's kind of settled down as I got into the school year.
Yeah, as it should. We didn't want to put too much of a burden on you, but we wanted to highlight your work, which is absolutely wonderful. When we were at the state capitol in April, we heard some of your poems, and they're just wonderful. So we're going to read a little bit. I was wondering, Shreya, do you want to start us off by reading one of your poems?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So this is a poem called I Am Girl, I Am Bird, and I'll just start. The curve of my feather collection reminds me of a riverbed I run into as I turn sparrow, osprey, cardinal. The girls in my garden bloom like ink blots, egg shivering into wing. Summer holds us in her hot mouth, seals her lips and suffocates us until we lose ourselves. I have no name. No one ever gave me one. I'm girl, just girl. In October, I slice pumpkins into jack-o'-lanterns, pretend I'm sculpting a body, which is to say, I am clay, warm and pliable, folded many times over until I am shapeless lump, nothing but cracked bone and body. As us girls slip into the frost, my arms hollow and the air brittles. Not the kind that breaks you, but the kind of breath that slowly sweeps you up. The upbeat of air before a smack of lips, molded to cocoon each other, a hollow chrysalis that kissed a winged thing, meaning, I am moth. Every winter, my sister and I hope the painted ladies arrived safely in Mexico, with an ache that can only be described as maternal. So I wonder if women were born to care, if it's something instinctual, primitive, in other words, natural, in other words, fluttering. March comes before the birds do, and I curdle at the change of season, so I'm something small, a bud that cannot burst until spring.
That's a beautiful poem. Is that a new poem?
I wrote it maybe a few months ago, so not like super new, but yeah, relatively new.
That's new in my book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love all the metaphor in it, the sort of the I am this and I am that, and the idea of transformation and coming into maturity. And are you writing more poems about the natural world? Is that an interest of yours, to write about nature and critters?
Yeah, I feel like I just go through some phases. Like when I was writing this, I was super interested in like very like nature themed, like nature imagery poetry, and then I sort of like transition in and out of what I'm interested in at the time. Yeah. I
think that's a good strategy for a poet. I'll read a poem. Is that okay, John? Yeah. And then if you have questions for us, yeah.
Sure.
I always like to read this as my one of my true Iowa poems, because I'm from North Dakota originally, and I feel bad that most of my body of work is about North Dakota. And right now I'm actually working on a book-length poem, a kind of docu-poetic book about the oil boom in my home state, so it's full of research. And I like to research, and this poem actually happened to me. Sometimes poems happen, you just show up in a place and you see something and that's a poem. And this was a medical display at the Iowa State Historical Museum in Des Moines, and it was artifacts from a ear, nose, and throat doctor's office, and he had practiced in Des Moines for something like 3 decades. And so it was all these things from his office, and one of them was these sort of shadow box displays of everything he had dug out of people's ear, nose, and throat passages. And he had them on display. They were all documented, and so I knew immediately it was a poem. And so this is Things Not to Put in Your Mouth. Medical display, Iowa State Historical Museum, Des Moines, Iowa. A penny, a quarter, a button, a paper clip. Safety pins closed and open, most ingested while changing diapers. In 2 shadow boxes, Dr. James Downing displayed the objects he'd extracted from patients' food and air passages between 1929 and 1956. A wishbone, a kernel of corn over large, a pen nib, beads from a necklace with the string still attached, a nail, a screw, a cover from a bottle of Anacin, thumbtacked in rows, suspended in glassine envelopes. The objects floated in glass cases, a warning about things not to put in your mouth. A toothpick, a rhinestone earring, a wadded up ball of paper, a metal snap, a cocklebur seed, spiky as a porcupine, a long sewing needle, a sardine can turnkey, many small chicken bones, things with sharp edges, cumbersome things that get caught in the throat, things that go down hard and refuse to come up. A Daughters of the American Revolution pendant, a gold hinge from a jewelry box, a price tag marked 89 cents for item number 1025293 from Yonkers Department Store. The exhibit includes the doctor's leather medical bag and his instruments of extraction, a tracheal dilator, a uvula dilator, laryngeal and esophageal forceps, along with a humorous note jotted in a hospital report. Feed her anything but nickels and pennies, the note reads, beside the very nickel extracted from the child's throat.
Wow, okay. Very interesting. So I'll remind folks who are watching on Zoom that you can submit questions in the chat, and folks here in the room, obviously you can ask questions and I'll get a microphone around to you. But I thought maybe I would start, and maybe a good segue, Deb. We think of poetry so much as being observational, seeing the artistry or the possibility in things that maybe the rest of us would just walk by, and that's such a good example that I'm sure hundreds, thousands of people have seen that exhibit, but you decided that it was something that you wanted to capture creatively, artistically, and kind of building off of that, with both of you being here in Iowa, is there anything about being in Iowa, the things that you see and observe and all of that has an impact on your poetry, that the impact might be different if you were elsewhere? Not just the geography, I mean, that can be part of it, but what is uniquely Iowan about what you're doing?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I've lived here since 1991, so I think I technically am an Iowan.
We'll call you, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I admire about Iowa is the fact that I think Iowans have a strong belief in education for their kids, and the idea that we have largely agricultural economy in this state. Obviously, there are many more economies going throughout the state, but people really believe that they want their kids to go to college and live a life of, not only of work, but a life of ideas. And so this is one of the things I think that has kind of nurtured me since I arrived in the state, that I felt that my interest in, I was a dreamy, imaginative kid growing up in North Dakota, and I felt a lot of times like people were sort of saying, where did she come from? I felt I was being, raised by, my parents were not my real parents, and soon my real parents will be around to pick me up, and they'll be artsy, and, So I feel that the state of Iowa actually supports and encourages and nurtures art a bit more. And the other thing I feel about Iowa is it's a state that's maybe it's teaching at Iowa State, that's part of it, very interested in production. There's a lot of a feeling out in the fields, people are trying to produce as much yield as they can. And within the institution where I teach, there's a lot of emphasis on getting your work done, producing, getting things out in the world. And that has really helped me as an artist, because as a dreamy, imaginative kid, I could just walk around and compare this to that forever. But when I'm pressured to, produce something, so I think those might be the main ways. I think it's such a beautiful state. I've been traveling around a lot more since I was Poet Laureate, going to all the corners, seeing just the incredible beauty of the landscape too. And my feeling is that Iowans know it. They really love it. I was just up in northwestern Iowa, and the people, when I got to the library, Marcus Public Library, the people were just, I said, it's so beautiful up here. And they said, yes, of course it's beautiful. That's why we live here, So it's really been a blessing to have found my way to this state.
Yeah, great. How about you, Shreya?
Yeah, I feel like maybe unlike Deb's poetry that stems from observation, I feel like a lot of my poetry more comes from emotional, it's more internally, and then I put my feelings onto the page rather than through experiences and observing the outside world. But yeah, I feel like Iowa's definitely inspired me in the sense that maybe compared to the rest of the state, I feel like Iowa City and the high school that I go to is very diverse, and I think that I don't know, that's really a beautiful thing to be able to interact with people from all different ethnicities, nationalities, viewpoints. I think that that's really interesting and helped me a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if folks in the audience have any questions, just feel free to raise a hand, but I'll keep jumping in here. You're both on kind of different ends of the spectrum, with Deb being a teacher and Shreya, you're a student. Do you, in both cases, does that have any influence on the work you're doing? I mean, I would imagine, Deb, as you're teaching younger poets or more formative poets, it must surely have an impact on how you perceive your own work and the work of others. And Shreya, by the same token, as a student, you're absorbing everything, and you have all of these different influences because you're young in your career. And what does that do for how your work is evolving? And either one of you can jump in there, I guess.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I feel like it influences me in the sense that like all my poems are, at least in my opinion, like pretty different from each other. Like I try new styles, I try new like subject matter. I feel like being a student, it just like gives me a lot of like wiggle room to experiment with different types of poetry and like you know, absorbing like information from as many different sources as I can of different poems.
And I remember that your teacher came to your event at the state capitol. Was he an influential teacher for you, or have you had some influential teachers?
Yeah, definitely Mr. Robbins. He's like my English teacher. He was my English teacher last year and this year. And he's helped me a lot with my growth as like a poet. He's just a wonderful teacher. He really cares a lot about his students, and I think that that's just like super important, especially when dealing with something so like, I don't know, like a very intimate form of writing, which poetry is. And I feel like having that care that he does for his students and like the very like specific feedback and how it just shows like what an amazing like quality teacher he is. He's great. He's probably the most influential teacher I've had.
Yeah. I mean, being a teacher, it's a strange profession because we give, I think it's a profession that's based on generosity. Obviously, we do get paid for what we do. Some get paid better than others, and some have heavier workloads than others, and teaching can be, at points in the semester, an incredibly oppressive burden, and one wonders, like, how did I get myself into this, and how do I get myself out of it, when those stacks of papers are there. But I think that ultimately, in the end, we, as teachers, we spend our time investing in other people, and I think there is also a kind of a trade-off that I've often said. I'm a better writer because I'm a teacher, because I've had to figure things out in order to explain how someone else might do them, and so that kind of forced me to take what was otherwise a kind of intuitive practice and codify it into technique and craft. And obviously, teaching, you build networks of friends, and I think, this is what writers really need. They need networks of other writers, because you learn so much just from being in the proximity of other writers. I'm really primed to answer this question, John, but I'll try to say it quickly. But I just wrote an essay called "What a Writer Needs," where I was invited by Humanities North Dakota to go back and try to recount, were there certain critical junctures in my life as a young writer, and what happened, and how did it get me going in the direction I went. And one of the most important ones was, I was a freshman in college. I was 17 years old because I left home as soon as I graduated from high school. And I had a freshman comp teacher. I had never been trained to write creatively, but the teacher said, write an essay to the class. So I wrote an essay, and I wrote an essay about home. Maybe I was a little homesick, I'm not sure, but I remember walking back to the dorm from that class, and my teacher had written on the back, "You use the leitmotif to advantage. No one will ever accuse you of sentimentality. I think you could be a writer." And I remember thinking, a writer? Well, what does a writer do? I had no idea that there were writers. It sounds really naive now, but I thought that all the books were written, all the writers were dead, and it was just up to us to read them now. And suddenly, this teacher suggested that there were living writers, and I could be one. And I still have that paper. I've carried it with me through my whole long life. And there are other moments when teachers did significant things, but just a little postscript on that story. When my third and fourth books were published, I tried to find her, to thank her, and thank her in the acknowledgments. And I could never find her, and people at Bismarck Junior College, now Bismarck State College, said, we think she was a lecturer, they didn't keep very good records. And then I just sort of gave up. And then when my memoir came out, The Horizontal World, I was invited to come and read at Bismarck State College. And a woman rushed up to me in the foyer and she grabbed my arm. She said, "I have to talk to you." And she said, "I was your teacher when you were here as a freshman." And we both were just weeping at this point, you know. And I said, "I have been looking for you all these years to thank you for encouraging me." And she said, "Oh, you know, you were always a good writer and I followed your career." It was the most amazing moment.
Wow.
And then I was able to publicly thank her. And then about 6 months later, I got an email from the chair saying that she had passed away.
Oh.
So it turns out she was probably quite ill that night. And so it was especially, you know, just a very amazing full circle moment where you could actually say to one person, that thing that you did, that was so important. And in a way, it was a very small thing that she did, you know.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. And I'm sure that that affects you as a teacher then, knowing that any small stray comment said in the right context to the right person could have, you know, tremendous impact.
That's exactly right. It's about receptivity, I think, and that's what writers really do. They train themselves in the art of receptivity, and it's kind of an antenna thing. You know, it's sort of like, we don't know about this anymore because we have cable now, but we used to have these rabbit ear antennas on TVs, and you'd move them, and sometimes you'd move them a certain way, and then it would pick up a signal. And I think that writers, it's really a good idea for writers to spend a lot of their time sort of working on their antennae and their state of receptivity, because, you know, things to write about are happening all around us all the time. And so it's just a matter of getting oneself into that state where we can see it. And it's more of a feeling for me when it happens, when I see something.
Well, and I know, you know, speaking of impact, one of the reasons that we created the Youth Poet Ambassador role was wanting to identify a student and say, you have talent, you have something that we want you to share more broadly. And of course, Shreya was the first one that this light was shined on. I mean, how does that feel for you as a writer to have that affirmation, and does it make you think differently moving forward about your work and how you want to pursue it?
I'm going to be honest. At the beginning, it was a little overwhelming. I was like, oh my! Yes. I was like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just like not like as receptive to like compliments. I'm like, oh, it's okay. But I really think that the Poet Ambassador position helped me a lot in like affirming that like poetry is something that I can pursue, even if it's like professionally, because I always like might have thought of writing as something that I sort of did like on like the sidelines of my life, but it's what I like actually wanted to pursue. But I was like, no, I can't do that. But I feel like the Poet Ambassador position really like reaffirmed that this is something that I can do like professionally, or yeah.
So it is working.
Yeah.
We're getting the impact we wanted out of that.
Yeah. Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Well, I was hoping that we could maybe get each of you to read again. I mean, we have you here, and I know folks would love to hear you do more if you have other things that you could share with us.
Yes, of course. And I just wanted to say, I think the other wonderful thing about having you, Shreya, as our inaugural youth poet is the fact that you're such a wonderful poet, and I hope that, you know, it sends a signal that we honor the voice of young people, the voices of young people, and we have such actually a vibrancy in this state of young voices. And so I hope that we can find more and shine a light on them. Should I go ahead and read, or do you want to read? I'll read first. Okay. Oh, this is just literally like the saddest poem I think I have. Sorry about this.
Perfect for a rainy day.
Yes.
That's all right.
This is called Pre-Existing Conditions, and it was written actually in about 2012 when the debate was still going on about whether or not we should pass the Affordable Care Act. And President Obama came to the Iowa State campus, and I wanted to just go and grab his legs. I'm sure the CIA would have, taken, or the Secret Service would have taken me off, and say, please, please, get this thing done. And one of my sisters died unexpectedly during this time. And I realized after the fact that she didn't have health insurance. And so those things together caused the writing of this poem, Pre-Existing Conditions. And it has an epigraph from the Sister Simone Campbell spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and she, arguing for Affordable Care Act, she said, "I am my sister's keeper." 3 weeks ago, my sister went on her lunch break and turned right for home rather than left for the clinic, where she might have been forced to admit to the doctor that the pain in her left arm was something more than the chronic ache in her left shoulder from the ladder fall while cleaning last year. Instead, she went home for soup, which is where my brother found her the next morning, seated at the kitchen counter with her head resting in her arms, as if she'd only fallen asleep after her boss reported she hadn't come to work. She rose each day at 5 a.m. to bake muffins and fresh bread, to make the potato salad and rotisserie chickens that stock the coolers and shelves for the convenience of those who don't have time to cook. Too young for Medicare at 58, she earned an hourly wage that held her just above the poverty line, just enough to disqualify her for Medicaid. I see now how she fell between the cracks. Sure, she tempted fate, cooked with too many eggs, too much salt, sugar, butter, cream. Food was the love she offered to the world, and didn't we gobble up every rich thing she put before us? Did she calculate the cost of the coverage offered her under the new Health Care Act and think, $400? That's a car payment. That's 40 hours of labor, a full week of wages. How I wish she'd been forced to buy it. On that last morning, did she turn right for home instead of left for the clinic because she knew a trip to the doctor would mean a quadruple bypass, loss of a job, bankruptcy, the forced foreclosure of a house almost paid for, $700 left on the mortgage at the time of her death? So did she decide to take the pain and risk it, believing she was too tough to die? Well, she wasn't. To be human is to walk around with pre-existing conditions, always some muscle or valve poised to fail, some cell ready to grow wild. Never before have I wanted to speak to my president and say, please, hurry up with this. She was my sister. Do you understand? As children, we shared a bathtub in those years of once-a-week Saturday night washings. I can still feel her soapy back against mine. As teenagers, we shared a bedroom, whispering late into the darkness between our twin beds, until one of us would grow tired and say, Little Red Schoolhouse on the Hill, which was our private code for shut up now so that I can get some sleep.
Thank you, Deb. Shreya, would you like to read?
That was lovely. I love the line, when you were describing to be human is to be born with pre-existing conditions, and then you described the different body parts and cells going wild. I love that. That was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
So if maybe this is also a sort of sad poem, so just jumping off of that. So this poem is called Rainfall and Her Savage Children. I wrote this, and I think that after the fact that I wrote it, maybe a month after, and I was editing it, and I was like, this is my pandemic poem. So I wrote it, and I feel like at the time I didn't know exactly what I was trying to say, but then after I wrote it and I sort of just reorganized it, and it was about sort of feeling lonely or solitary, but in the time of the pandemic where we were all sort of separated from one another. Mm-hmm. And I think I'll just read it. Rainfall and Her Savage Children. I once read a novel of man skinned alive, man going bloody corpse, going big hunk of flesh. He unraveled, unfurled and undone, one thick sheet of chest, intact with everything, wet and shiny, as if he could slip through your fingers, a firm object turned difficult to hold. I think this is how it started. I now exist in the millimeter-wide gap of blade and skin, garden and rain. It has been 3 months since that novel, 10 sheets of fired paper, edges curled, bowl-shaped and burning. No matter how many books I read, how far apart each atom really is, the universe is not expanding. My counter-argument, a universe collapsing back into itself, the pages of a first draft, peeled with the precision of hunters skinning deer, the flawless skill of arriving at core, something raw, firm, fleshy, something black and hard at the center of something fleshy, at root. The forest I live in calcifies, away from these warm hands of mowed suburbia. In the smell of rain on grass, I can trick myself into only counting in integers, thinking there isn't infinity between each digit. To curl my toes in plowed soil, when the rainfall came a second time, she turned everything in my front yard golden. Cropped weeds and bare skin, now sandy plain. Unpalatable, something that can't rest in mouth. The saddest thing is I never liked the idea of birds. Wish they'd all stop flying, wish they'd plummet to the ground until the rainfall brings the teeming. Clog the drainage pipes until the rainfall brings the lush. Pile up in the streets until birds turn into mountains. With all that's left, only the sticky, the grains of sand tucked away in nail bed, something meaty erupting from mouth. My mind as weed-clogged garden, as hurricane of birds. It will take a while to clean, but there never should have been anything so free to begin with. Defying all natural order, all seed and conception, something so unwatched, unchecked, slick as warm stone at center of stomach. Who knows what sorts of havoc they could wreak? Bird in egg, in soft chrysalis, originless and like rain. Man at yolk, at genesis, my unshelled and undercooked egg. When the rainfall came a third time, I told my mother I was depressed. What I really meant was, I often get my feelings, exhaustion, and sadness mixed up. That I've been feathered, then skinned over 100 times by the end of this poem. I wish I could be some kind of vessel. I want to be boat-like, like Elle. Isn't the whole reason we're here to hold something, to be held?
Wow, thank you very much. And before we started, I had asked Shreya, because it's raining outside, if she had a poem about the rain on glistening on the streets, and she said no. And of course, she had that instead, which is why you're over there and why I'm over here. So well done. So again, if we have any questions from anyone on the Zoom, I don't see any that have come in yet, or anyone here in the room, feel free to raise a hand, but I am always happy to continue. I wanted to talk with you, and we hinted a little bit at this, our organization was involved with helping to create the Youth Poet Ambassador, and so we can talk about, or did talk about, what our motivations were, but I was wondering for both of you, like, what do you see as your goals going out into the community and talking about poetry and sharing poetry and trying to get people to write poetry? Like, what, if you do one of those things in a day and come back home saying, I was successful, what does that look like? What's a good day for you in that role?
Do you want to start?
Sure. I think that my goal is really to just encourage other young people to pursue poetry. I feel like it's such a wonderful form of self-expression. It's very therapeutic for me, and I feel like you could do that for others as well. I think that literature really, it does so many things for me. It expands like my education, my self-understanding, my vocabulary. So I think that it's very impactful for me and something that I would like to share with others. And I remember this one time I was on this Zoom with a bunch of children. We were doing, it was a poetry reading where they would go up by grade level. They'd be like a few like elementary students and then junior high and then other high school students read their poetry, and then I'd finish it off with a poem of my own. And I just remember this one girl, she was probably in like first grade, and she's like, after I read, she was like, wow, you're like so amazing. You're like the best, this was like the best poem I've ever heard. I was like, stop. That was so, it was so flattered, and I hope that by me being there and like reading some of my poetry, it like inspired her to continue writing. I feel like that was just such a sweet moment.
That's great. Deb?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the process of reading poems, and also, reading them publicly, but then also reading books of poetry or individual poems as they create resonances. And so, whatever the subject of the poem is, that might not be exactly what your particular memory it triggers, but there's something about the way poems work. They go inside and then they create these resonances. So I might be writing about a park bench in Rapid City, South Dakota, and you might never have been at that park bench in Rapid City, South Dakota, but something about the way I'm writing about it resonates. It's like with tuning forks. You hit a tuning fork and everything in the room that's sort of organized according to that frequency starts to ring. And that's what, for me, that's what poems have always done. From the very, first time I ever heard them, someone, reading me a poem, I've always felt that happening. So it seems like that young girl had that experience with you, and that's really so valuable. One of the things I'm trying to do as laureate this year, because I lost a whole year during the pandemic, and I had something like 35 events that I had to cancel, which was just so difficult, because do you know how much time it takes to organize 35 events? I mean, it's like a lot of emails, and this last year I was really lucky because I got a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets for this laureate fellowship, and it offers me the support, including things like travel funds, hotel funds, to go around the state and plan different events. And my proposal included doing experiential poetry events. And what I really want to do is find parts of the state that have some natural feature that, like Makokata Caves or the Effigy Mounds or, the Missouri River on the west part of the state, and go, the Les Hills, and find a naturalist who knows a lot about that place, and then have that person come out and walk us around and just give us a kind of a natural history tour of the place, and then have this group of people who have signed on for this go back to a local library or community center and then do some prompts, some free writing prompts in response to what we've learned. And I've done a couple of them already.
Great.
And I did one in Washington, Iowa, and it was really fun. There was this wonderful, really willing group of people. I was lucky because they had a writing group already, so it was a ready-made group. And we went out to this conservation center. And I try to tack on a reading at a public library as well as a classroom visit, so I can do multiple things when I go to a region. So it's been a little tricky organizing because it sits in the cracks between disciplines. So it's sort of when I talk to naturalists about it, they're like, okay, that's weird, but I'll go along with it. And poets are kind of like, okay, I guess we can go out on a little hike if you want. And so everyone, I'm trying to fuse the things that I'm passionate about, learning more about natural history and learning more about the state. This is an amazing state in terms of natural history. And every time I go out, I learn more. So my winter plan, this is an improvisation, because I'm not going to trek around outside in the winter. It's cold enough today. I was really freezing. I want to go to local history museums all over the state of Iowa, especially in these little towns. There are these amazing local history museums that are just like full of postcard collections, letter collections, porcelain doll collections, thimble collections, farm implements, everything. And I want to have a kind of treasure trove, treasure hunt, and then and then come back and do some creative writing prompts so people will generate something right on the spot and go away with something they never imagined they would ever write. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Wow. Such a visceral way to spark the creative process. That's great.
Yeah,
I like that.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask each of you about your current work, and particularly Deb, with your new book that's out. But since you were talking, I'll give you a moment to catch your breath. And maybe Shreya, could you talk a little bit about what you have been working on? I mean, you're saying that you're continuing to write poems. Is your creative work more limited to that, or are you doing other things as well? I would imagine that you've got a lot of ideas percolating there.
Oh yeah, of course. I love writing short fiction as well. I think that fiction writing is super amazing to me as well. So I feel like the thing is, a lot of times my fiction works take a lot more time to produce. I feel like I'm just not as used to them. So I think over the summer I was writing a lot of fiction, but then once we go into the school year, I obviously have less time to write. During the school year, I mostly write poetry unless we have an assignment at school, and then it'll push me to write fiction. I'll be like, yes, I'll finish this short story that I've thought of for so long. But yeah, normally during the school year, I mostly write poetry just because of the time. It works better with the timing. And then over the summer, I'd work on fiction.
Yeah, great. Well, we always look forward to seeing what's to come,
Yeah.
so that's great to hear. Deb, maybe you could talk a little bit about that new book. I mean, we so identify you as a poet, but obviously you do a lot of other kinds of writing, and this is an essay collection that you have out now.
Yeah, it's called Gratitude. I'm sorry, that's my poetry collection that's coming out. It's I'm confused. It's called The Night We Landed on the Moon, and it's a book of essays. I have it right here because I just love the cover so very much. I'll flash this cover. Essays Between Exile and Belonging, and I had this working theory that whatever our parents were grappling with at the moment of our conception becomes sort of our life. This is an interesting prompt for writers to think about. Whatever tensions or differing dreams might have existed between our parents when we were conceived and born, become, in a way, they maybe mark our lives, and this is definitely my case, because my work always negotiates this idea of belonging versus exile, and expatriation too, because I was born into a kind of an ethnic enclave. All my grandparents were immigrants. The thing I probably should have done was just stayed where I was, because that was what was expected. But my impulse was just to flee, to leave as quickly as possible. But I keep getting pulled back, if not only in person, but also in memory and imagination and desire. I mean, I miss home. I'm in a state of sort of chronic homesickness. So this essay collection it's comprised of essays I've written over the last maybe 20 years, for different purposes. Anthologies, sometimes anthologies will contact you and say, do you have an essay about weather? No, I don't, but I'll write one. So my weather essay is in here. Or I have an essay about basketball and the connection between poetry and basketball, which I did make a connection in the essay. And there's a lot of travel essays in it too, because in the last 20 years I've done a lot of international travel to Greece and to Russia, where my grandparents came from, and I ended up writing essays. So it is a true essay collection. It's not a memoir, but it's really wonderful. You write and write and write and write and write, and then you think, the file's getting kind of thick. This is how all my poetry collections have happened. Oh, my poetry file's getting kind of thick. Let me look, and then I'll realize I have a real collection there. So it's been really fun to have it between hardcover and to be able to go out and read from it. And then I have a poetry collection coming out, a new and collected, Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars. So that'll be out next spring.
Yeah. What was the process like on the new and collected? The collected part, I'm assuming that you were selecting poems from different books and different eras to put in there. What was that like?
It was painful because it is an actual collected. So I have three poetry books, And one of them is out of print because the small press that published it went out of business. And so it's really nice that I was able to, get the rights back. But I had to try to look back on my older computers to find the Word files that contain those collections. And in the case of my oldest collection, I just could not find the file. And I think it's probably because it was back in floppy times. And I'm not talking about the rigid floppy, but like the big floppy, right? So I had to retype a lot of my poems, which was a really strange experience. And then I don't know if it was the right thing to do, but I actually revised some of the poems and amended them, changed the form that they were in when they were in the actual collection, because I don't know if this happens to you, Shreya, when you go out and read, but I change poems as I read them, and sometimes on the spot, which doesn't always work out that well. But when I saw poems I was putting in the new and collected that clearly I had read differently when I would read that poem in public, then I would amend the actual version of it.
You have any thoughts about that, Shreya? Like when a poem is done, is the poet allowed to continue revising?
Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like every time I go back and reread my old poetry, I usually change at least one thing about it. I feel like the poems are almost always evolving. But I don't think I would be able to change it while I'm reading it out loud.
I have done it rather foolishly. I don't recommend it.
Great. Well, we have a question that's come in on the Zoom, and so I'll ask that, and then we're getting toward the top of the hour, and I'd love to get each of you to maybe read one more poem after that. So the question is making reference back to your comment about antenna, Deb. I really like the idea of antenna receptivity that was mentioned, but it seemed like a lot of contemporary life is based on constant distraction. Do you have any insight in how the mind can be trained to really focus on something interesting instead of being distracted by everything? So nice, easy question for you guys to contemplate there.
My goodness. I feel that Shreya, as the younger poet, should answer this question because you are. I think, isn't this a generational thing? I notice my students are able to listen to music and have the television on and do their homework,
Yeah, I am not one of those people. I feel like I'm very distracted, especially by noise. Even when I'm taking standardized testing, I know I was I took the ACT a couple months ago, and there was this someone was tapping their fingers on the desk, and oh my God, it was so frustrating when I was taking the test. But no, I can never listen and listen to music or have TV running in the background and think clearly. No, I wouldn't say I'm one of those people, but I do know some of my friends can do that. They'll have 50 things running in the background and they'll be doing their homework. I'm I can never do that. But
yeah, I think of us as different versions of a computer, and I think younger people have just faster processors, and maybe can handle that sort of multitasking. But I think maybe the word here is filter, that we can find a way to create filters that will just push those extraneous, non-essential things out of the way, and let the thing show itself. But if I think about the way it works for my own process, like when I went to the historical museum and I saw that medical display, I knew immediately it was a poem, and I got my little notebook out and started just writing the list of all the things that were in the display cases. But then I wrote Ted Kuzer, who's a friend of mine. He grew up in Iowa, and I said, Ted, there's a poem waiting for you at the historical museum. I thought it was really his poem and not mine. And then he didn't write it for years, so I thought, I guess it's mine to write. But I've had this experience many times where somebody just says something, and it's almost like it's in a museum under that special light, just for a second. Sometimes I can feel it on my tongue. Sometimes it's just like a thing that it kind of pauses. It pauses, and just for a second, it just kind of wells up. I had the experience yesterday. My former father-in-law died 2 days ago, and I got the call. And I discovered that the day before he died, he had inscribed his last book of poetry, and he had written me a note and put it in the mail. And so just yesterday, Saturday, I got his poetry book with the inscription to me, but he had died, 2 days earlier. And immediately I felt there was a poem, "Your words arrived too late." There was just a line that came, "Your words arrived too late." And that's often the way it works for me. I'll just get one line, or a lot of times it's an image. And then I store it in my notebook and then just wait for it to, wait to have the time, or wait for it to grow just a little bit more gravity or tension or weight. I'm not really sure exactly what it is. It's an undefinable quality in a way, what I'm trying to talk about, but it's a form of attention that, going back to the antenna question, the antenna is the way to get a lot, but this form of focus is a kind of filter that allows you to see the thing when it shows itself. And I'm sure I miss like thousands of things every day, but if I get a couple, I feel lucky.
That's interesting. So you never heard from Ted Kooser?
No, I did hear from him, but he never wrote the poem.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I was wondering then if we could close, because we do have a few moments left, and maybe ask each of you to read one more poem. Again, since we have you here, we'd love to hear more.
Looks like you have one ready, Shreya.
I do, and I'm like, I don't know if I should read this one aloud though. So I'm like scanning it again. I think I'll read an older one. So if you want to start,
I can do
I'll
that.
search for the one that I want to read.
Well, I just drove 2 hours on a really rainy freeway, so this is a driving poem. I've gotten really soft-hearted when I see roadkill on the side of the road. I just always have this kind of like, my heart just kind of like, contracts. And I feel so bad for these little creatures that are just trying to, get around. So this is called Even on a Sunday Drive. Even on a Sunday drive, it's possible to break your heart. This smear on the freeway, a jumble of feathers, checkered dark against a mottled white breast. Impossible to mistake the rufous brown, the upturned spray of red tail feathers, edged with black. It's strange to see the moment when the efficient killer meets the greater death, the fatal blow dealt by a speeding car just seconds ahead. It's better to pity the mice, voles, and rabbits, the snakes and warm bloods who scuttle in short grass under the hawk's swift talons. But the sight of red-tailed hawks in winter perched in bare branches, like frumpy Winston Churchills officiating the freeway's cold ditches and topcoat and tails, always makes me laugh. But today the sight of this smaller hawk, turning circles in the emergency lane, 2 miles up the road, staring backwards with that look on her face, where is he? Reminds me that hawks mate for life, incubate their eggs in cooperative pairs, and build nests like upturned bowls of sticks to hold their young, which makes me want to stop the car, bend my forehead to the pavement, and whisper, I'm sorry, forgive me. But the locked traffic propels me forward, and 3 miles up the road, another distraction. A rider truck encased in blazes parked across the median. The truck's contents flaming poker hot against the horizon. Already sirens approach in the distance, and 3 humans circle the catastrophe.
Thank you, Deb. Did you find one you'd like to read, Shreya?
Yeah, I'll just read the one that I had originally. I was like, I don't know if I should, but I think I will. Yes. So this one has like a bit of the first one I read. I stole like a few lines from that poem, and I was like, I feel like this fits in this one as well. So maybe you'll hear something that I read earlier. So yeah, this is like a short-ish, it's a little love poem, and it sort of like takes place on like a movie set, but or like a directing area, and I'll read it to you. So the title is Scene 1, You Below the Trellis Beside the Pond. If I could say it all, narrate the veil of your lower lip, the trellis plush and bursting with oranges, dovetailing your frame, it would be for you to overhear and offer a proposition, not as artist, but as philosopher. I paint your lotus seed as exchange of power. The director cuts. I thumb the placid tip of breast, lick its silhouette off muslin dress, and wonder if this is something instinctual, primitive. In other words, natural. In other words, fluttering. In the cathedral, we're 2 breaths away from confession. I am your only audience. You cannot see me through the fog of my blush. So leave me to fallow, to restore fertility. Before the distraction of pink silk ribboning your chest, I am something that is not flustered more than hungry. I sneak an unsolicited touch, seek the blur of sighs and sibilance. Once the playwright becomes gardener, and you, cherry, that swells and bleeds, we can begin again. I am begging him to mount you to action.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you decided to share that with us. That was wonderful.
That was, in other words, natural, in other words, fluttering, which I loved those lines in the earlier piece, too.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that almost sounds like a title of a poetry collection, doesn't it? In other words, natural, in other words, fluttering. I don't know.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, those are my favorite 2 lines from my other one. So I was like, oh, it like fits the atmosphere of this one too. So in like a different context. So
That's great to see how you use the same lines
Yeah.
in different contexts, as you said, and give them different meanings as they go. Great. Well, thank you so much. I think that brings us to the top of the hour, the end of our event. This is one of the final events of the 2021 Iowa City Book Festival, so we thank those who joined us both on Zoom and here in person. Most of the events that took place have been recorded or will be recorded, and they will be posted on our festival website, which is iowicitybookfestival.org. So if you missed anything or would like to revisit something, you can always go there to find those videos. And please help me to thank Shreya Khullar and Debra Marquart for joining us today. Thank you very much.
And thank you, John, for this event, and thank you to the audience for coming. We appreciate your presence. Thank you.